Hello and welcome to another episode of the TCR podcast. I'm your host, Brent, and I'm joined in the studio today, as usual, by the co-trustee of Timeshare Contract Resolution, Rich. How are you doing today?
Good, bud. Thank you.
Good. Thanks for joining us in the studio. I am very delighted to have a very special guest in the studio. She is a senior specialist with TCR, and her name is Kate Bakker. And welcome to the studio, Kate.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yep. Absolute pleasure. Kate, in a nutshell, would you mind just explaining to our audience what is it that you do and how long have you been working for the company? And just maybe you can just give us some insight as to your job at TCR.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been with Timeshare Contract Resolution for over 6 years. And essentially what I do is when someone is inquiring or is curious about the possible exit options or opportunity to relieve some of the timeshare stress, they call in, and I'm really, along with my associates, the first line that they speak with. So essentially what I do is I ask you a few questions about your experience in general overall, and then we really dive into, have you had any issues with availability, which is very common. We hear frustrations with that. Often increase of the maintenance fees is usually a number one, especially now coming into the fall where those maintenance fees are due right around the corner. Owners are getting their bills, and they're curious of, are we paying this another year, or are we going to try to reduce some costs and, look into our options. Mm-hmm. So essentially, that's what I do. And then I ultimately set them up with a contract specialist who really dives in deeper, reviews your situation, and see if there are elements that we can use to really help you get out of the contract, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, timeshare contracts as legal instruments can be very complicated at times, and I know more often than not, a lot of timeshare owners could potentially just overlook something in a contract, mm-hmm. Perpetuity clauses. Mm-hmm. And so normally you the front line, at the front line for TCR as mm-hmm. far as being the first point of contact. When some people call in, they maybe they're embarrassed about their situation, yeah. or feel, somewhat defeated. How do you make them feel comfortable about their situation as far as opening up to you and mm-hmm. explaining a little bit more about mm-hmm. their situation?
Yeah, great question. So, it's funny, I really let them know that nobody is safe. We have really smart individuals like themselves that find themselves in these situations of high pressure, and they really feel like they don't have even an option to get up and leave the room. And so really just allowing them that freedom to just be like, it's okay. There's so many people like you calling us every day that are kind of embarrassed, maybe you could say, to even admit that they maybe made the wrong decision at that time. But I really take that as they just weren't informed. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of misrepresentations and discrepancies between what owners are told during these presentations versus what's actually written within their contract. And I don't blame them for that, because oftentimes what we're told is that they weren't given the opportunity to read through the whole contract, mm-hmm. maybe take it home, have somebody else look over it, and then make a decision when they're actually informed, and have maybe fact-checked.
Just to touch on the topic of misrepresentations, maybe, Rich, you could just give us a quick little 30-second overview of what some of the typical misrepresentations are that somebody like Kate may typically hear. And then, KB, if you could maybe just explain to the audience, what does that process look like, yeah. from when you actually have spoken with them to the next step, which is speaking to a senior analyst who then would go dive a little bit deeper into their situation. Maybe you could just explain that after Rich has given us a brief little yeah. overview or reminder as to what some of those misrepresentations typically are.
So thanks, Brent. And thank you, Kate, for being here. Kate is, she's kind of being somewhat humble. She's been with us for over 5 years, right? But not only is she passionate about what she does, but she's also one of our top performers month in and month out. And I think it comes through, right? One of the things that I talk about with the analysts, as you know, is I would buy from the people that we have working for us. And same with you, Kate. Obviously, I would buy from you, right? Because you believe it, you're sincere, and you come across that way. As far as the misrepresentations that we get, there's so many, right? I would say one of the top ones that we get a lot, and Kate can elaborate even better than I can, is that when they go to these properties, they're pitched. They're paying tens of thousands, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars for this timeshare. Mm-hmm. And what they're finding is when they go on vacation, right, and they're milling about with other fellow people at the resort, they're finding that a lot of those people just went through online booking agency or bookings.com or Expedia, mm-hmm. and they're paying $189 to $259 a night, right? Yeah. And meanwhile, the people that own the timeshare that paid tens of thousands of dollars, if they don't have reservation priority, they don't have exclusivity, they get really upset. Mm-hmm. And it seems like that's happening more and more and more, mm-hmm. Because people are just, they're finding that, why am I paying all this money if somebody can just get online mm-hmm. and access this property for a fraction of what I'm paying?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And again, there's a lot of them, but that comes up a lot.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And so obviously your job is to be able to ascertain what misrepresentations, if any, have actually occurred, mm-hmm. and then once you've done your thing, as far as we'll touch on this topic here in the next little segment or next question that I'm going to ask. But then how would you essentially move that mm-hmm. client along and setting the expectations for that client, because who they're going to meet with next, basically in the next step?
Yeah, so we have the senior analyst, the contract specialist, who they would speak with next, and there's an opportunity there for these owners to really sit down with a specific developer, contract specialist, and review what is in the contract versus what they were told, which they had already gone over with me. Mm-hmm. And then looking at, okay, is there enough basis here where we can actually challenge the integrity of the contract to a degree to essentially dissolve or find you resolution, mm-hmm. right? And that speaks to not only the the contractual obligation, but also the financial obligation that is oftentimes, like Rich said, tens of hundreds of thousands of dollars that these owners are subjected to. Mm-hmm. Some would say without their true consent. Mm-hmm. Yes, we signed on the dotted line, sure, but did you really go through the interest rate? Mm-hmm. A lot of owners I speak with have incredible credit scores. The interest rate on these loans does not correlate with that. Mm-hmm. It doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes that detail is left out, costing these owners hundreds of thousands of dollars over the course of, most of these loans are 10 years, let's mm-hmm. say. That's hundreds of thousands of dollars that they're not aware of when they're signing in that moment. Mm-hmm. And had they signed, they may have thought twice, of course, or done some calculations quick versus what you spend without owning mm-hmm. and what you spend with this contract.
Yeah, which actually kind of pivots into my very next question, which is the financial aspect of it for a lot of clients or a lot of consumers is actually a very private, very personal, and sometimes very emotional topic of discussion, because you have to delve into their financial mm-hmm. situation. Mm-hmm. So I know that you have to deal with a lot of those situations on a daily basis. Are there any specific patterns maybe that you see in some of these owners, timeshare owners, and their situations as far as like their financial situations? You don't have to necessarily give too deep specifics, but are there common patterns that you see based upon like the misrepresentations, and are they genuinely struggling, with their finances, etc.? And how often do they actually open up?
Well, I'll say that oftentimes what we've heard from other owners is that this is described to them as an investment. Mm-hmm. This is described as a real estate purchase, something that you could pass on to the kids. And when anybody, I'll say, is presented with an opportunity, you could say, to have an investment, to provide something for your kids that maybe you didn't have, there's an emotional trigger there, mm-hmm. right? An emotional where they start thinking like, yeah, this is a great opportunity. The unfortunate part of it is that these timeshares are being sold on sites like eBay, Craigslist mm-hmm. for $1.
Yeah.
right? And of course, you're not going to pull out your phone and think, I'm going to look up eBay and see and fact check a moment.
Yeah.
And then on top of that is that these same exact rooms, their cousin or their neighbor are booking on sites like Expedia, Booking.com,
Yeah.
Airbnb, and so there's moments there where they're not aware of that, right? And so when it comes to the financial, back to your point of the finances with them, when it's presented as an investment, you can justify it. You can justify the upfront cost. You can justify the monthly, because ultimately at the end of my 10 years, I'm going to be able to have the opportunity to sell it. Well, that's not actually the case, right? And so then we find owners who are trying, maybe they're 5 years in and they're thinking, oh man, I'm not getting priority reservation. My maintenance fees are going up. Well, maybe I can go back to the developer and they can work something out, right? And what we hear a lot is at that moment, the timeshare developers will upgrade you into more and justify maybe, but we'll reduce the maintenance fees. And then we're just starting that cycle over. So, again, as I had started with, everybody is subjected to this. Nobody is safe, right? And it really just comes down to breaking it down, which is really where we come and come beside you and really break it down as far as what does this contract have in it written? What does that mean? Breaking that down first and identifying those points so you're aware and informed. And then also breaking down the cost of keeping it versus the cost of getting out. And oftentimes the cost to get out is, pales in comparison to it, right? I mean, there's just absolutely no comparison. So, and I find that the feedback is that the owners are very appreciative that we're not trying to sell them getting out, but we're genuinely coming by and saying, this is the truth and the reality. Here's the math. Now, let's make an informed decision. What would you like to do?
So being an advocate,
And
right?
being an advocate, and brings it back to being an advocate, absolutely, which is our number one thing is being an advocate first and foremost. I say to owners when I first speak with them, I say, my job and our job here at TCR is to not only let you know what you own, but also identify any maybe misrepresentations and maybe some things that you were not aware of when you purchased that may have changed your decision ultimately.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. And as a first point of contact for TCR, where you're dealing with so many consumers every day and handling these very sensitive and emotionally charged issues, for you personally, at what point can you say that you could actually know you helping a person go from like hopeless to maybe presenting a very viable solution that becomes like there's hope, or there's there's a solution on the other side. So for you personally, is there at any point in your conversation, or can you maybe just elaborate a little bit on that aspect?
Yeah, well, I think when you break it down to, the availability is huge. I'm paying for something that I was told I was going to get exclusive access to. My husband and I haven't been able to book a trip for 2 years because we've had to pay these extra fees on banking points. And then come to find out I can't even use the week, or I can't even use the points that I paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for at this point. I'm frustrated. What do I do? Is there any hope? Right? And the truth of the matter is that, we're not timeshare haters. We're just adamantly opposed to the misrepresentations. And I say the silver lining is that you're not losing access to these locations.
Yeah.
You're just gaining financial freedom. Right? Because you can just as easily go on Expedia and book the exact same trip. In fact, let me do it right now. Let me look it up for you right now.
Yeah.
Tell me tell me when you generally go. Tell me your favorite location or property that you go to, because I want to make sure that it's exactly what you want. And now let me just show you the alternative of look, it is available, and look at that nightly rate. And let me run the math with you on what you're spending right now. Let's break it down. Is it more cost effective for you, or would it make sense to go this route?
So to elaborate on what Kate's saying, so we talk to, as you know, hundreds of people every single day. Unfortunately, we can't help everybody. And to Kate's point, we're not against all timeshare, right? There are some timeshares that fit into categories where people are actually, happy or satisfied. But when you find that somebody's been misrepresented or subjected to unethical sales practices, that's kind of the bell that goes off, right? That's kind of the first, okay, that's the alarms going off here that this is somebody we can help for sure.
Yeah, and to expand on that as well is we've done an episode on the TCR podcast before explaining just some of the outlets or the possibilities that a timeshare owner can potentially explore. And there's no real legal so-called way to really exit a timeshare or cancel a timeshare, as a lot of people say. But we do know that, a lot of people, as you had mentioned, are trying to sell their timeshares on eBay and other avenues where they could try and list their timeshare. But more often than not, those avenues typically lead to nowhere. Yeah. So I know you do have a lot of clients who typically pursue a lot of these options. Yeah. How do you go about yourself explaining, timeshare, the value of the proposition from timeshare contract resolution to why ours, or at least timeshare contract resolution services, are more beneficial than, say, listing on eBay or pursuing another avenue, which essentially leads to nowhere?
Yeah. So essentially I say to owners, there is the cancellation period initially. There's really two ways out of a timeshare contract. One of which is going through your developer within that cancellation period of 7 to 10, 30 days, of course. But then there's elements of, if you pay off the entirety of your timeshare, sometimes if you just have the maintenance fees, you can go back to your developer and ask them if they have an exit program. Now, we found that always, it seems to change. Developers, they have it 1 year and then they take it away and then they have it. So there's really some inconsistencies there. So how we come into play is, first and foremost, we are a consumer advocate. So if we can find a free solution for you, we are absolutely going to have you take that and encourage you. And there are more times than not where I say to them, if it, let's say it's paid in full and they have maintenance fees, I will first say, have you spoken with your developer and asked them if they have an exit option for you? Well, no, I haven't, which is fine. Okay, I recommend you call them. Do you have their number? Here's their number. I'm going to text you my direct phone number and email, right? So you have my direct contact. Give them a call, see what they say. And if you're not sure about what they're saying to you or just want a second opinion to really see if that's honest, because they're already a little scared, right, about if it's really honest, I say, give me a call back and I'll run it with you and see if that's legit. And that's what we're hearing also from other owners and with your developer, and sometimes they do call back and they say, hey, Kate, this is what I was told. Is that true? Yep. Fact checks out. You're good to go. That's the best option. If they give you any grief, give me a call back.
Yeah.
And then alternatively, if that's not on the table, then I say, well, based on the situation or based on your experience, and maybe there have been some misrepresentations that have occurred. I'll ask them, like the investment, or have you seen your maintenance fees go up? What was your understanding of the maintenance fees when you first purchased? Maybe there's some room there where we can look at. Then I'll say, I highly encourage you to speak with one of our contract specialists or our senior analysts. They really can do a deep dive with you and let you know what we're really dealing with and what your options truly are, and then go from there.
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to expand on some of what you were saying, and also one of the things that we have spoken about in a previous episode, Rich, was the benefits of Exit Scholar, which is TCR's so-called, how would you describe it?
Go-to.
Yeah, it's your go-to method or your proprietary exit resolution strategy.
Yeah.
Maybe you could just briefly, for the audience, elaborate on that, because I think it kind of partners in tandem with what Kate is alluding to, and that is that we do provide these solutions to a consumer. Maybe you can just explain a little bit about what Exit Scholar is.
Yeah, of course, thanks. So, as we say, we're not adamantly against timeshare necessarily, right? The ones that we are against, we're against. However, I would say the same holds true to the timeshare exit or timeshare cancellation companies that are out there. There's very few that, we would trust or we would recommend, or as Kate was really saying quite well, is that we're going to recommend, suggest, or encourage. If somebody's going with another company that we feel is credible,
Yeah.
or they can get, resolution, we're not going to speak bad about a few of the companies, right?
Right.
And in fact, one of which, Bo and I actually, just recently visited, because we've got a common bond of how we want to do things. So what we've talked about doing is introducing Exit Scholar to some other companies, because we feel like we have never had a better product than we have right now. And as we've touched on previous episodes with Juan and our client services team, the success we're having right now is fantastic. In addition to that, what we also would like to do is get a handful of the companies that we really trust in this industry and come up with some sort of a coalition or some sort of a certification or some barrier of entry where these folks have to qualify or be certified, if you will, to even be in this space. Because as much as we're against timeshare, I should say misrepresentations and unethical sales practices, we're equally against the people in this space that are taking advantage of the folks as much as the timeshare companies are, right?
Yeah.
And that's an issue.
Yeah.
And so, Kate was being kind, but, she comes across some people sometimes where they're dealing with somebody else. You just want to make sure, well, okay, who are you dealing with? I've never heard of that company. That's, that's a red flag. If we have, we're going to encourage, suggest, and recommend. And a lot of times they'll end up coming back because of the way that we treat the people,
Yeah.
right? It's a totally different vibe when they're talking to us compared to some of these other
Yeah.
companies.
Yeah. And I've noticed, having previously worked for TCR before, is a lot of the time many consumers don't even know that they've actually been misrepresented
Yeah.
at all. And it really comes to the front line, which is you specialists that have to ask these probing questions about misrepresentations. Perhaps you could maybe just explain to the audience what some of those questions typically are.
First and foremost is availability. How has your availability been? Most of the time, owners say, "Oh, it's great. Oh, okay, that's awesome. So you're able to book whenever you want. There's no issues with availability." And then then they'll say, "Well, there was my wife tried to book last week for Christmas and we're 6 months out and she can't get anything." And then I'll say, that's what we're hearing a lot from other owners right now, and I'll tell you why. It's because these developers, they all work under what's called hotel policy. So that's why you're seeing these same exact rooms on Expedia. So I bet you if your wife went on Expedia right now and booked Hawaii, she'd be able to book it no problem. Oh, and then I follow up with, well, how have your maintenance fees been? Have you seen them increase? Yeah, I have. Did they tell you that they were going to increase, or how did they describe those to you? And based on that, more often than not, I hear from other owners is that, well, they told me it would not increase at all, or it would increase but very little as we see inflation. Sure, fair. Were you aware of the perpetuity clause? Now, I believe we've touched on the perpetuity clause in other podcast episodes, but the perpetuity clause really means that, if God forbid anything were to happen to you or your spouse, right, or whomever else may be on the contract, then there's a possibility that this contractual obligation and financial will get passed down to the next of kin, so your kids or whomever else is in line, right? And that really rubs people the wrong way, because they say, well, they didn't sign. Why would my kids automatically get it? That doesn't seem fair. And granted, it does not seem fair. However, we can use those elements to really challenge the integrity of the contract, right? Which helps build a very strong position against these developers, which is a great position to be in when you're looking at those exit options.
Thanks for elaborating on that, Kate. I really appreciate it. Before we go, I know you've spoken to hundreds and hundreds of clients for TCR. Is there one specific success story that you'd like to share with the audience where you had actually helped them and they have been ecstatic about using TCR as a catalyst to getting them out of their financial conundrum with this timeshare?
Well, there's many. I mean, being worked here for 6 years, there's a handful, right? But most recently, I had a couple who were elderly, and I was asked to reach out to them, and they really didn't know that they even had exit options. And what had happened is that they just recently got put into a very large financial obligation with a developer. And I was explaining to them, well, how much are you paying per month? And when did this happen? And so, the husband wasn't really excited about the conversation naturally. But the wife was like, okay, honey, let's go over this, right? Let's run the math. And so I really broke down the numbers with them, and they were spending an ungodly amount of money. I'm talking like $100,000 plus. And, wow. Just giving them the relief and knowing that you do have an exit option, and this is what we're going to do to help you combat this, which is a complete relief to them. And I'm sure their family has a weight lifted off their shoulders just because mom and dad aren't in this situation anymore. And that's just freeing in itself, knowing, so it's very nice.
So I'll share something with you, Brent. This is something that we can relate to immediately because, as you know, I had a nightmare travel yesterday. Got in super late. It just so happens that the Uber driver that I had was complaining about, I won't mention the developer, a very prominent name, and but he went to a company and got out, and now he's relieved of it, and it was us that got him out.
Get out of here.
What are the coincidences? What are the chances of that, right? That I was in the Uber with this guy. And that's actually the third time that's happened with an Uber where we get into a conversation. One time we took the person's timeshare, and then about a year later I got the same Uber driver, and he goes, hey, you don't remember me, right? And I go, refresh my memory. He goes, you guys were helping me get out of the timeshare. He goes, well, you got me out. Yeah. And I'm like, oh man, that's freaking killer, right? That's great. That's awesome. So it is. There's nothing better, right? Yeah. When you get somebody out. So
absolutely.
Did you want to talk about this real quick?
It's
now not all timeshare sucks, right? Not all timeshare.
Yeah, exactly.
But the ones that do, they suck, right?
Yeah.
We're not against timeshare in general, but the ones that do suck.
Yeah.
We're definitely against them, right?
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. All right, thanks for joining us in the studio today, ladies and gentlemen. Just wanted to give a special shout out to Kate. Thanks for joining Rich and I in the studio today. We look forward to collaborating on a couple of other ideas for the timeshare resolution space for the audience specifically. Rich, thanks for joining us in studio today.
Thanks, buddy.
We look forward to another episode. Don't forget to check us out at www.timesharecontractresolution.com and hope you all have a wonderful evening. Thank you.